Good morning. I'm Pete Najarian. This is the Take for Market Rebellion on this Wednesday morning. It's a shorter week. It feels a little bit different. And I'll tell you what, yesterday the pressure was on the market early. When we take a look at the Dow, it was down a couple of hundred points almost right out of the gate. And as we got through the majority of the day, we continued to hold on to those negative sides of the market. As a matter of fact, finishing the day down about 270 points. A little bit of a different story for the NASDAQ. Again, we've been talking about a fairly tight range for the NASDAQ. We still continue to have that tight range. It really wasn't a whole lot more than about 40 points or so. But we actually did finish the day. We had a little bit of an acceleration from the morning lows and finished the day in positive territory. So the NASDAQ finished up about 10 points. You look over at the Dow, down about 270 points. So a definite little, you could see the nuances of what's going on behind the scenes and where some of the money flows were going or coming out of yesterday. Volatility index, yes, we talked about 18 being an area where we were when we started the day yesterday. That's about where we finished the day as well. Take a look at crude. Crude's been holding somewhere in those 68s, and that's been part of what we've been watching in terms of obviously the energy stocks. And energy's either had these huge moves to the upside or huge moves to the downside, and it just seems to be swaying back and forth a lot like the financials with the 10-year. However, yesterday, 10-year looked pretty solid. We were up there around 137. Financials really didn't give us a whole lot. We had some movement here and there, but overall, not the kind of reaction that you normally would be looking for. I mentioned the volatility index. I always like to tie into that. Also, some of the volumes. And when we look at the derivative volumes of yesterday, just underneath 37 million contracts, 36.6 million contracts trading yesterday. The old leadership is back. Apple, 1.7 million contracts. Tesla, 1.2 million contracts. But take a look at some of the names up in that top group of volumes on the day, those rebel stocks, as we've decided to start calling them. The rebel stocks. You look at Clove, that's one of them. AMC, that's another one. BBIG is a name that we've brought up on multiple occasions here on the Take. And I'll tell you what, those volumes are there. Take a look at what's going on, as a matter of fact, today in BBIG. It's a stock that's up about 12%. Matter of fact, me and Glenn were just talking about this name. So we've seen the volumes. We've seen a lot of call activity, far more call activity than put activity in some of these rebel type names. And you start to take a look a little bit deeper as we're getting some of these moves. Keep an eye, by the way, when you look at some of the volatility that we're seeing in GameStop, one of the very originals, obviously. You look at GameStop, they are looking for a fairly significant move in terms of where's the implied volatility? Close to 200. Where's the stock? Close to 200. What kind of movement is expected right now? Well, you add the calls and the puts right at the 200 strike, gives you about 28 points, give or take. That's talking about a pretty significant move, something a little bit less than, call it 15%. So that's something to keep an eye on as well. Sectors, industrials down about almost 2% yesterday. Consumer staples, they were under pressure. When I look at the industrials, and all you got to do is take a look quickly at the Dow and some of those other names in that industrial space, but Caterpillar, Boeing, Honeywell, 3M, Deere, those kind of names, all under some pressure yesterday. But we had some stocks that actually were working pretty nicely yesterday. Take a look at some of the casinos. Wynn Resorts, for instance, up about 5.5%, followed by Penn, followed by Las Vegas Sands, up close to about 4%. Those Chinese names that we've been talking about, they have literally been the beta, that movement that we have been seeing. And part of the reason we've been seeing some of the NASDAQ actually movement that's actually finished in positive territory, you can credit some of that at least to what we're seeing in some of these Chinese names, NetEase, PDD, JD, Trip.com, all these names. We're talking about 2.5% all the way up to maybe a 5.5% type of moves to the upside on these Chinese names. Now, again, when I talk about beta, beta works in both directions. We'll get into that in just a minute. Moderna had a nice turnaround after some of that pounding that it had taken. It was up about 4.5% or so yesterday. We had some great unusual yesterday. We had it in Netflix and we had it in Tesla. And those two names finished strong. We'll get into a little bit of that about what we're seeing today as well. But when we get into today, it looks like there were some concerns early on, at least, about the variance and a little bit of pressure on the markets. Nothing big. Dow was down in the pre-market, maybe 20 points. NASDAQ really, again, not doing a whole heck of a lot. But as we started to get into this first hour of the day, the NASDAQ started to slip, down 40 points, down 50 points, down 60 points. Last I looked, we were down about 45 points on the NASDAQ. That could change in a heartbeat, so don't hold me to that. But we also had a pretty interesting flip right out of the gates when you look at the Dow itself. The Dow just kind of floating around early on, opened down about 40, 50, 60 points, quickly sort of recovered from that, actually jumped up about 60 points or so, and then came right back. And last I looked, it was closer to the flat area, as we were also looking at the NASDAQ down about 40 or 45 points or so. When I take a look at crude with a pretty decent move to the upside, it was trading last about 69, 69 and a half, somewhere in that range. 10-year down just a little bit, not a whole lot of movement there. 135 for that. The VIX, though, the VIX has been up and down. It's been pushing closer and closer to 19, and then all of a sudden we see it start to drift right back into that mid-18s, maybe even the low 18s. So in that 18 to 19 sort of category for the volatility index. So some of the sectors that we were seeing some movement early on, energy, take a look at the crude, energy up about 1%. Materials, financials, they were down about 0.5%. Tech down just a little bit, not a whole lot. Semiconductors, they were getting beat up a little bit. You look at some of those names that were leading to the downside: Micron, AMD, NVIDIA, Taiwan Semi, really getting a little bit of a push to the downside. So all of that kind of pulling on the semiconductor, the subsector index there as well. Housing. So some of the names that stood out for me early on: Pulte Homes was down, call it close to 5% early. Seagate, Western Digital tied in a little bit to whether or not you want to put it into tech or the semis or however you want to put that storage type names. They were down about close to 3%. Those Chinese names that I just mentioned a moment ago, under some pressure today. You look over at the same exact names. You look at the FXI that had a nice day yesterday. All of a sudden you look at those names pulling back a little bit today, down close to 3.5% for Netties, down over 1.5% for PDD. JD down about 1%. So a little bit of pressure on those Chinese names, nothing huge. When we look at Netflix and Tesla, however, they don't seem to be getting too bothered by the markets at all today. As a matter of fact, last I looked, Netflix was trading right around 613, 614. Matter of fact, Tesla getting very close to that 760 level. We had option activity in both of those yesterday. We have some follow-up option activity today. So it's really kind of interesting to see the movement there when you're seeing a little bit of pressure on the markets themselves. I got two unusuals. We'll get out of here. And I got a fairly clean slate today. I may be joining the 5 o'clock group with Fast Money, but that has not been confirmed yet. But we'll see, and I'll keep you posted with that. I'll see if my assistant or myself can get that out there. So DraftKings, number one, that stood out. 63.90 was where the stock was. We had a big buyer, 11,500 of, yes, again, very, very short-term September 10 calls. That's Friday. They expire, but they're buying the 65 strike calls there. They were 37 cents up to about 95 cents or close to that level. So just something to keep an eye on. I always like to give you those reference points because I know these stocks can move, and I also know we see implied volatility start to rise sometimes in the options, but that's what we were seeing very early on. DraftKings hit fairly early in the trading session. Secondly, we got COTY. Now that's beauty products. Now it's not a name that we talk about frequently, but when we see the unusual, it definitely does stand out. Stock trading just below 8.5. It was trading at 837. Had a buyer of 10,000. Oh, by the way, pushing out a little bit. Wow, all the way out to November. The November 9 calls. So you got a little bit of premium in here for the time premium that you're paying for when you get a further out option like we're talking about here. The November 9s, those are going for 61 cents up to about 70 cents for those options. As I say, 10,000 of those trading. So a pretty decent sized trade, and it's not a whole lot of movement you've got to get that stock up there towards 9. So they're buying some time. It's fairly short, distance between 837 and where the strike is of 9. So that's what folks are looking at right now. That definitely stood out for me with some of the unusual. A couple of nice sized trades there on both in DraftKings and in COTY. Folks, have a great day of trading. I'll tell you what, knowledge is king. You really want to know it. You got to research it. You've got to read books. You've got to get stuff online. And of course, we've got some great mentors here at Market Rebellion. I bring it up almost every single day. The reason I do is the derivatives markets are strong. They continue to grow. And if you want to be a part of that, you need to have that educational side as well. Folks, have a great day of trading.